questions 9 to 12 together. I met with Pope Francis during his visit to Dublin Castle on Saturday the 25th of August. The meeting provided an opportunity for both of us to discuss a number of issues, though regrettably not at any great length because of the short duration of our meeting. I welcome Pope Francis, who thanked me for the warm welcome he'd received on arrival. We spoke of the legacy of pain and suffering caused by the failures of the Church and State in Ireland, and we discussed how Ireland is still a country with strong faith, but that there is much to be done to bring about justice and truth and healing for the victims and survivors. I thank Pope Francis for his statements on climate change, on encouraging countries to accept refugees, and on international development. And we also spoke of Irish missionaries and how they continue their work today, and also about the Pope's home country of Argentina and the role of the Irish there. I used the opportunity during my speech later that day to expand on these issues and to express my strong wish that words needed to be followed by actions. I strongly believe in a greater separation of church and state, and I believe in freedom and respect for religion. And I hope that the visit of Pope Francis will be the opening of a new chapter in the relationship between Ireland and the Catholic Church, one where the Church is no longer at the centre of our society, but one in which it still has an important role to play. I think it's very beneficial that government should engage with churches and faith communities in a structured way. And on the 22nd of January 2018, I and several cabinet ministers met with representatives of the Church of Ireland, Presbyterian and Methodist churches in a formal meeting under the structured dialogue process between church and state. This was the second in a series of meetings that I'll be holding with dialogue partners. We discussed important social and economic issues facing Irish society, including Brexit, education issues, the Eighth Amendment, international development. And on the 31st of August, I and some of my colleagues held formal meetings under the structured dialogue process with representatives of the Catholic Church, led by Archbishop Eamon Martin. A wide-range discussion took place on a range of important national and international issues, including education again, Northern Ireland, overseas development and social justice. Some of these issues were discussed at these meetings were very challenging, and they are issues on which people have deeply held views and on which some consider to be a matter of conscience. Our discussions were valuable not just because they dealt with important issues, but particularly because they were conducted in an atmosphere of respect for the views of others, where everyone sought to be more constructive. Like public reps generally, I meet church leaders informally from time to time in the course of attending official or public events. In particular, with the recent visit of Pope Francis, I attended several events that were also attended by representatives of various religious groups. I've also had the opportunity to engage with the Muslim community around Eid and our Jewish community around Passover.
Then you be Cassie again and Jack Damon Ryan.
Thank you much indeed, Taoiseach. I was particularly interested in the speech you gave in the meeting with Pope Francis in Dublin Castle, and you set out there the ambition of a new covenant, if I'm quoting you correctly. And I think later on in the speech you kind of made the point, for example, our hospital services, saying that you're looking for one based on a civic and scientific ethos, which I agree with. But I suppose the real question is, what exactly does that civic component include? And I hope it does and can include people of religious faith and communities, because they bring a lot to our society. They should not be central, they should not have control over the state in any way, but they have a contribution to make. I'm interested to know, hear from you, how you think, where would that covenant be constructed? I mean, I hear of your meetings, cabinet meetings, but is there any wider mechanism you see us partaking in to develop that type of civic society? I was very taken by a book published by a number of people, including Jerry O'Hanlon, SJ, earlier on this year, A Dialogue of Hope. And he was setting out how the churches could actually be useful in the dialogue that the state needs to have across all our work. But I think actually now it's slightly changed almost. The covenant, or a conversation around such a covenant, might actually be a useful mechanism for the church to engage in a synodal way with other churches, with people of no faith, in actually answering that question. What is that role for churches and all and none in our society? Would you consider such a synodal approach in bringing people in to consider that covenant question?
Gormagat and Kid Chuck McDonald.
Gormagat Count Corla. Taoiseach, I raised with you last week or the week before the issue of the Tuam mother and baby home, and you reflected the fact that you had visited the site in a personal capacity. I understand you've made a commitment to meet with Catherine Corliss and with the survivors. You might just inform us if there has been any progress made on such a meeting. When the Pope visited, Minister for Children Catherine Zappone met with him, spoke with him, gave him a letter relating to the abuses carried out in mother and baby homes. And of course the Church has a responsibility in a case to answer in that regard, but so too does the State. I want to put it to you, Taoiseach, that the burial site at the Tuam Mother and Baby Home must be secured, the remains exhumed, and every effort made to reunite the remains of the babies and children buried there with their families. That is the government's decision to make, and I think it's the right thing to do. I want to urge you to meet with some urgency Catherine Corliss and the survivors. They want to meet with you before Minister Zappone concludes her work. In respect of Minister Zappone's letter, she stated that she was of the view that the Church should contribute significantly to whatever decision is made. She stated that contribution should be done willingly, unconditionally and quickly. I want to know, Taoiseach, if there has been a response from the Pope to Minister Zappone's letter, and if so, what has that response been? Was it justified and reasonable? What is the financial ask of the Church?
Barrett.
In your speech to Pope Francis, you talked about a new chapter in the relationship between Ireland and the Catholic Church. Now, the message in the repeal referendum and maybe in the visit itself, and the far lower than expected numbers going to see the Pope, I think clearly indicate, as you mentioned there, that the relationship the majority of people in this country want is a separation of the institutions of the state from church and religious doctrine. So the question is your vision of that going to be different from the old relationship when it comes to critical services, who runs them, what services they provide, particularly in areas like health and education? In particular, I want to ask you about the National Maternity Hospital, which I've asked about and others have asked about and are deeply concerned about. Peter Boylan wrote an alarming letter in the Irish Times in August, where he pointed out that the Sisters of Charity who are saying that the St. Vincent's will have to uphold the values and vision of Mother Mary Aikenhead, founders of the Religious Sisters of Charity, and the Irish Catholic Bishops' Conference published in their Code of Ethical Standards for Healthcare that Catholic health facilities will not provide assisted fertility treatment, artificial contraception, morning after pills, surrogacy, abortion, a referral elsewhere for abortion, sterilisation or gender reassignment surgery. Now, if that is going to be the situation in the National Maternity Hospital run by St. Vincent's, the new St. Vincent's group, that would be absolutely unacceptable. So what I want, Taoiseach, is reassurance, and more importantly, the women of Ireland want reassurance that the National Maternity Hospital will not be abiding by that sort of code of ethics.
Brendan Harlan.
The Taoiseach some time to respond, but I want to ask two questions. Just very strongly in support of the point made in relation to the Tuam Mother and Baby Home. I understand that an initial document was handed by Minister Zappone to the Pope on his visit. I understand that a second letter, a more comprehensive statement of fact, was submitted to the Vatican, and I certainly would be interested in hearing what response, if any, has been received to that, and how. I presume the response was directed at the Minister for Children, but has the Taoiseach had sight of it, and should we have an openness in relation to the contents of this correspondence? And secondly, in relation to the general principles set out in the Taoiseach's speech in Dublin Castle, whether the suggestion now of a citizens' assembly, and I think that's a very good model, it's worked very well on a number of seemingly intractable and difficult and challenging questions, might be the model that you might consider now for the examination of the future ownership and control of education in this country.
I think we need, as a society, to remember that we shouldn't replace one intolerance with another. In an era when organised religions have already moved to a different role and significance in society, tolerance and respect for different faiths isn't just something which should apply to smaller religions. And the recent visit of the Pope, I think, was very welcome, as was his open and sincere approach to the issues which were raised with him. It is now 8 years since the government announced that the transfer of 50% of church schools to alternative patronage. The result delivered is actually the dramatic slowing down of divestment. The process adopted has crawled along and seems to have missed the opportunity to take up Archbishop Martin's offer to immediately divest large numbers of schools in Dublin. Can you explain if you've taken any initiative, Taoiseach, to move the divestment process out of its slumber? And have you followed up the Pope's visit with any specific engagement on the issues raised during the visit by you and indeed others, as has been referenced?
Taoiseach, I can just give you about 3 minutes to deal with all the questions.
Just on hospitals and healthcare institutions, the Minister for Health has asked Catherine Day, former head of the civil service in the European Union, to lead some work on that for us, on what the future relationship and governance of our hospitals might look like. I haven't had sight of that yet. Not quite sure how advanced that work is, but I look forward to seeing the outcome once it's ready. I do think that voluntarism in health and education does have value. Faith-based bodies, churches, have brought to schools and hospitals often a good ethos, not always, but often a tradition, experience, and a loyalty to those institutions. And while things need to change, I wouldn't like to see all of those good things lost either. And we know the valuable work that religious and faith-inspired charities do in areas like housing and homelessness, for example, in areas like the alleviation of poverty. And I wouldn't like to see a separation of church and state that is so rigid and so cold that it would lose all that or refuse to engage with all that good work and that positive spirit of voluntarism which does exist in health and education as well. In terms of the new National Maternity Hospital, it will be publicly owned, and any medical procedure that is legal in Ireland, including assisted human reproduction and terminations of pregnancy, will be available in that hospital. It'll be publicly built and publicly owned, and that's how we intend it to develop. I should point out, though, that the National Maternity Hospital itself in Hollow Street, not too far from here, is actually a voluntary hospital. While he doesn't attend the meetings anymore, the chairman of the board is the Archbishop of Dublin. I think it's important to recognise the starting point as well as what we intend to be the end point. Deputy Ryan, I think, made some good suggestions, and I certainly give consideration to the proposals that he makes. In relation to Tuam, Mr Zappone is developing proposals as to how we should deal with the site of the former mother and baby home, and of course, most particularly the remains of those children who are buried there. When she has that work done, or when it's substantially complete, it's my intention to, alongside her, organise those meetings. I don't know if there's been a reply from Pope Francis or the Vatican yet to her letters. To the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been, but I might not be up to date, so I'll certainly raise that with her when I see her again next week, or tomorrow if I do tomorrow. On citizens' assemblies, we've a few in train. There's one planned on gender equality and how we can further advance the gender equality agenda, and there's also one planned on the reform of local government in Dublin, a Dublin Citizens' Assembly, as to how that might look. And we've taken on board Deputy Ryan's suggestion that that particular one shouldn't be just citizens, that we should include in that councillors, perhaps even TDs and people who have an experience of local government, probably a little bit more like the Constitutional Convention model, 1/3, 2/3 than the Citizens' Assembly. But they're the ones we want to get done in 2019. we only have the bandwidth to do so many at any given time, but we may be able to do some more after that. On divestment of schools, it is happening too slowly. I acknowledge that criticism from Deputy Martin. But what's happening now in different school areas is surveys of preschool kids, and when that's done, it's going to inform us as to what parents want, and that will allow us to speed up that process again when we have it.